I used to think love meant standing by someone no matter what. That belief shattered the night Sarah told me she was pregnant. Not just pregnant, but determined to keep the baby. Sarah had always been my safe place. She was warmth, laughter, late-night talks about dreams we hadn't yet lived. But after the party, the one I begged her not to attend, everything changed. What happened to her that night stole something from both of us, even though I was never there. When she told me she was expecting, she called it a blessing hidden inside a nightmare. I couldn't bring myself to see it that way. Every time I looked at her, I didn't see hope. I saw damage. I saw a reminder of violence neither of us had invited. And I hated myself for feeling that way. I loved her. But the thought of raising a child conceived through trauma, one that wasn't mine, felt like drowning slowly. I didn't know if love alone could keep me afloat. I drove to Ryan's place that night, hoping for clarity. Ryan was the type to deflect pain with jokes, and sure enough, he didn't disappoint. He laughed it off at first, throwing out sarcasm like a shield. But when I really pressed him, he grew serious. If it's too much, don't force yourself, he said. Staying out of guilt will ruin you both. That answer didn't help. It only made my chest heavier. So I called Jason, an old college friend I hadn't spoken to in months. I framed it as hypothetical, but he saw through me. Jason spoke carefully, choosing empathy over judgment. He said if he truly loved Sarah, he'd stay, because she'd already endured enough. He talked about responsibility, about broken homes, about how absence could scar a child for life. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I realized something terrifying. No one could make this decision for me. Inside, Sarah agreed to talk. I told her how conflicted I was. How sorry I was for everything she'd endured. How torn I felt between loving her and fearing the future. She grew up deeply religious. I already knew what asking her to consider termination would mean, but I asked anyway. Her expression hardened instantly, like I'd crossed an invisible line. You already know my answer, she said. When I admitted I didn't feel capable of raising a child that wasn't mine, she called me selfish. Said if I couldn't accept the baby, then maybe I wasn't meant to stay. The conversation collapsed into silence. She walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a future I couldn't picture clearly anymore. I loved her. But love was no longer enough to silence my fear. And that fear was only just beginning to grow. But what I didn't know yet was that Sarah's decision wasn't fully hers, and the truth behind it would change everything. The weeks that followed felt like emotional whiplash. Some days were perfect, almost cruelly so. We'd go out for coffee, revisit our favorite spots, laugh like nothing had changed. In those moments, I convinced myself we'd be okay. Then she'd mention the baby. She'd talk about how she'd miss mornings like this after the baby arrived, or how life would never be this simple again. And just like that, we'd be back in the same argument, repeating the same words like a broken record. I'd suggest, carelessly, desperately, that she didn't have to give all this up. She'd accuse me of wanting to erase something meaningful. She'd ask me to let her have this one thing. And every time the conclusion was the same. She was keeping the baby. End of discussion. Afterward, she'd act like the argument never happened, like my silence meant acceptance. And I'd play along, terrified that pushing further would break her completely. What confused me most was her age. She was 19. We were students drowning in loans. She'd never once talked about wanting kids before. So what changed? That question followed me into the night, into the dark ceiling above our bed. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. The next morning, driven by fear and guilt, I did something I'm not proud of. I went through her phone. At first there was nothing, group chats, memes, store coupons. I nearly gave up until I found the messages with her parents. Her mother's words hit me like fists. Long paragraphs of blame, accusations, condemnation. She blamed Sarah's clothes, her appearance, her independence. She even dragged up old church scandals, implying Sarah had always been asking for trouble. Then came the ultimatum. Keeping the baby was the only way to redeem herself. Anything else would damn her. The final line shattered me. "You brought this on yourself." Sarah hadn't replied, but the call log showed she'd called her mother minutes later. Felt sick. When Sarah walked into the kitchen, I barely had time to process what I'd read. I forced a smile, hugged her, asked how she was holding up. She said she was managing. The dark circles under her eyes told another story. I wanted to confront her, protect her, scream at her parents. But instead I stayed silent, trapped between truth and trust. And the longer I stayed quiet, the more I realized her silence was hiding something far more painful than I imagined. I spent the next few weeks trying to make life easier for Sarah. I cooked, cleaned, ran baths, pretended everything was stable. But inside, the truth gnawed at me. She wasn't choosing the baby. She was being cornered into it. One night after dinner, I finally asked her to talk. I confessed everything, going through her phone, seeing her mother's messages, realizing the pressure she was under. She broke down instantly. Not in anger, in relief. Between sobs, she admitted what she'd never been able to say out loud. She didn't want the baby. Not because it was the baby's fault, but because it was a permanent reminder of the worst night of her life. She said her parents made her feel dirty, unforgivable, like the only way back to grace was punishment disguised as responsibility. I held her as she cried, realizing how alone she'd been this entire time. When I told her we could make a different choice, that she still had control, she nodded. For the first time in weeks, she looked lighter. But fear still lingered. Fear of her parents. Fear of being abandoned. The next morning she confirmed it. She wanted to terminate the pregnancy, but she was terrified of the fallout. I reminded her she didn't live under their roof anymore. That love shouldn't come with conditions. She opened her laptop, started searching. And in that quiet moment, everything shifted. But choosing freedom was only the beginning. The real storm was still on its way. The appointment came faster than expected. I drove her there and waited, my hands shaking the entire time. When it was over, she looked exhausted but calm. We went home, curled up on the couch, and let the silence settle. Then her phone rang. Her mother. Sarah answered, voice trembling. Her mother immediately asked about the baby. Sarah deflected, but it was useless. Her mom announced she was coming over. Sarah panicked. I told her to rest. I'd handle it. When her parents arrived, they demanded answers. When they saw the medication on the counter, everything exploded. I stood between them as they hurled accusations at their own daughter. I told them to leave, or I'd call the police. They called us sinners, disappointments, lost causes, and then they were gone. Sarah cried for hours. But beneath the tears was something else, relief. We thought the worst was behind us. We were wrong. The appointment came faster than expected. I drove her there and waited, my hands shaking the entire time. When it was over, she looked exhausted but calm. We went home, curled up on the couch, and let the silence settle. Then her phone rang. Her mother. Sarah answered, voice trembling. Her mother immediately asked about the baby. Sarah deflected, but it was useless. Her mom announced she was coming over. Sarah panicked. I told her to rest. I'd handle it. When her parents arrived, they demanded answers. When they saw the medication on the counter, everything exploded. I stood between them as they hurled accusations at their own daughter. I told them to leave, or I'd call the police. They called us sinners, disappointments, lost causes, and then they were gone. Sarah cried for hours. But beneath the tears was something else. Relief thought the worst was behind us. We were wrong. A year later they came back. Apologetic, regretful, wanting another chance. Sarah tried. Therapy helped, but wounds like hers don't vanish easily. Every visit ended the same way. Careless comment. A judgment disguised as concern. Another argument. Eventually, Sarah realized something painful but necessary. Not every relationship can be repaired. So she let go. Repeat button rehook. And in letting go of them, she finally held on to herself. Part 6. Choosing each other. Approximate. 650 words. Without her parents' shadow looming over us, our relationship flourished. We grew stronger, lighter. We learned that love isn't sacrifice at any cost. It's protection, honesty, and choice. And for the first time, our future felt like it truly belonged to us. Sometimes, survival isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to walk away together.